Hi everyone, welcome back to Loop Live for another year. My name's Josh Gallagher from MediaCom APAC, and I'm really pleased to be back to unpack the now and the next in media and marketing. We're back this year, but with a slightly different format. This year, we're here with you less often, but we're going longer and we're going more in depth into the topics that are both top of mind and tip of tongue. You'll hear a little bit less from me this year, but more from our experts in things like social commerce, what's happening next in retail, brand marketing, and some new thinking around audiences and identity management. What hasn't changed this year is the insider's view that we give you. And I'm joined today by some of the best. I'm super excited to have Sid and Joyce join us from our team at MediaCom, some real heavyweights in digital innovation and brand communications. Blake's going to join us from Hogarth in Australia, a real pioneer in digital addressable content. And we're going to have Alex from Uber APAC, which I'm sure you'll agree is one of the most progressive brands in the world. They're going to join me to talk about bringing trust to targeting with addressability. Sit back, enjoy a brief presentation from Sid to really set the scene. Then we're going to show you a case study and some best-in-class work from Uber. And then join me a little later on as I bring in the experts for a bit of a panel discussion and your opportunity to ask a few questions. If you've got questions, place them in the comments section as we go along, and then hopefully we'll get time to cover them off at the end. On today's topic, we're talking about addressability. Why is it important and what is it? Let's set the scene so we're all in the loop.
Has eroded to breaking point. People crave personalization, but only 1% of personalized ads pass the relevance test. Addressable media and message reframes the deluge of irrelevant advertising using a simple matrix of data signals to make advertising more relevant. Breaking the trust barrier starts with reframing what personalization can mean for brands. When done well, it can be a sustainable, full-funnel growth driver. The next era of effectiveness will be unlocked by integrating media and message together. Addressability gets the right message in front of the right person at the right time. It's not just another retargeted ad. Brands have the opportunity to programmatically target an audience with specific content through the combination of context, intent, and motivation data. Addressability bridges the effectiveness gap between scaled communication on broadcast channels and with one-to-one precision of retargeting. Revealing this magic in the middle is regarded by 51% of marketers as their top priority.
My name is Sid. I'm with MediaCom APAC, and I lead digital and innovation for us out here based in Singapore. Thanks for that setup, Josh. So as Josh mentioned, I'm going to spend the next 10 to 15 minutes talking to you about how we at MediaCom are thinking about addressability. With this session, we also have published the white paper, which I highly encourage you to read. And hand on heart, gentlemen's promise, you watching this session or you downloading the white paper does not mean that you will now start to see MediaCom ads on your Facebook feed. So just to set some context, I think it's good to start with a bit of introspection. So the question we ask ourselves is that, have we hit ad blindness? And I think we've all been there. We've all had that moment where there's this one ad that's been chasing us around the internet for days, for weeks, for months. If I look back at the last year and a half during the pandemic, I think there are enough memes and jokes floating around about workflow software or about grammatical kind of software apps whose ads have chased us around the internet. But why is this happening? Why have we hit this point where consumers have started to create, dissonance with this advertising? And we are here to explore that. We are here to talk about the fact that somewhere we as an industry need to start introspecting about the shift that is happening on the technology side. But at the same time, is our communication, is our message, are our experiences marrying that technological shift? So how did we get here? I think quite a few of you on this stream would have been on this digital advertising journey for over like a decade or a decade and a half. And I think all of us remember with great fondness the first time that we were ever exposed to targeting. The first time that we ever heard about how data and audience could be used very powerfully to talk to specific audiences. But at the same time, I think the message has not really married up to that advancement in technology. So if I look at this ad, just give me a second. This is the first digital ad that was ever served out there. And somewhere I use this for very profound reflection, because somewhere not too much has changed from a communication perspective. Overheated advertising technology ecosystem, but the communication and the message is still very much click me now, buy me now, try me now. Fun fact, this morning when I was kind of doing a bit of research for this session, I searched for a yellow sofa. And this is what my news feed looks like now. This is what my internet kind of feed looks like now. And I think all of us have been through that before. And what is this causing? This is causing inherent consumer friction, because we are not just losing attention, we're losing trust. And I think trust is very critical in the environment that we live in today, because trust creates experiences that consumers want to lean into. Trust creates experiences where consumers want to talk to us, where they want to communicate back, they want to create those feedback loops. We all have that one friend, who was in Bali, shipped out a year and a half ago. We all are exposed to his Monday morning posts about working from home, legs splayed out, coffee in one hand, picture of verdant kind of rice fields out there. We're also aware of that person bouncing from spectacular to spectacular Airbnbs. We know that he works in these amazing co-working spaces, which have untapped kind of coffee and have like happy hours every evening. That is who we are becoming. I think all of us have been exposed to that meme that floated around last year, that the pandemic has probably been the greatest accelerator of digital acceleration and transformation that we've seen. But again, if you do a bit of introspection, this is the profound reality of who we have become today. We have become individuals who want to curate our entire life, whether it's living, choosing not to live in apartments with fixed kind of tied in rentals, to living in Airbnbs, between cities, potentially even between countries. Working. I'm currently in office today, but tomorrow I'll be working from home, day after potentially out of a coffee shop. Play. My content, my consumption is entirely determined by me. I can get down to fine tuning exactly what I want to watch on different times of day, different days, times of week. And obviously my shopping. I think in subsequent series of Loop Live, we will be talking about things like social commerce, where the profound reality today is that the shopping arcade is no longer a finite arcade inside of a store, but it is an infinite catalog where we can choose a plethora of items from across the world. That level of curation is exactly what consumers want from advertising. That level of personalization. So what is the solution? With this friction, how do we solve for this lack of trust? How do we solve for this dissonance that we've created in this entire industry? We believe the solution is quite simple. We believe the solution is about creating communication, about creating experiences, about creating those moments that are personalized and super relevant so that consumers lean in. Because for us, a leaned-in consumer is someone who drives growth. A leaned-in consumer is someone who can drive business for you. And I think there's overwhelming proof out there that corresponds to this. So which brings us to the topic that we're here to talk about today, which is what is addressable. We started this journey a few months ago, where Josh and me started talking about, addressability as a whole. And I think the real struggle for us initially was to really pinpoint and define what addressable means, because we approached it from multiple lenses. We looked at it from the lens of pure data, technology, targeting an audience. We looked at it from the lens of context, environments, the shifting nature of the physical to the online to the virtual world. We looked at it from the lens of what do consumers really want? What is it that consumers are leaning into? And what we found through this discussion, through this journey, was that it's quite simple. As Josh said earlier, addressable is finding that magic in the middle, where media and message come together harmoniously, but keeping the consumer at the center. And that could not be more important. Now, how do we get to this point? So we've been talking about data for a while, and I think a lot of our clients and a lot of organizations today are really strapping up their efforts in terms of data warehousing, their data infrastructure, building out protocols which allow them to leverage granular and an incredible amount of data to drive these seamless journeys, these experiences. We're also seeing a massive shift in the nature of data that we have access to today. With the onset of the deprecation of cookies, potentially with the the huge rise on privacy with consumers wanting to take control, a lot of the identifiers that have been prevalent in the industry will no longer exist a couple of years from now. But despite that, we do have access and we do enjoy an incredible amount of data that comes to us by virtue of the communications or by virtue of the signals that we send out. For us, addressability starts with plugging the data into three very simple vectors. The first vector is motivation. Sid loves to watch 4.5 hours of Netflix unfettered every Saturday evening. Sid would love to be sitting on a comfortable couch while watching Netflix. Somewhere you try and understand my motivation. The second bit is intent. And I think this is quite critical because intent means both nudging as well as holding back. Today, we have data assets, we have the technology, we have predictive analytics that help us not just understand what a consumer is likely to do today, but also potentially predict what consumers are likely to do a month from now, or 2 months from now. We have recently done an incredible piece of work where we looked at travel trends across the region with trying to understand that when is it that travel will return to normalcy and how do the various stakeholders in the travel ecosystem create communication that fits into this very uncertain time that we're in. So that got us to a point where we looked at multiple vectors. We looked at travel lanes between countries. We looked at the incidence of vaccinated populations in countries. We looked at whether flights were available, hotel availabilities. And I think that gets us to a point where you can start to fine-tune intent, which means if someone does want to make a journey from place A to place B, how likely is she or he to do that? And if you want to capture that eyeball at that point, do you have the right message for that person at that point? And the last bit is context. I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and there was a veteran from the industry. I mean, she's, I think, 30 years in the industry. And she said something which really struck me and which was truly profound. She said, with this ongoing discussion around data, around architecture, around the complexity and the sophistication of data, it also almost seems that we're going back 20, 30 years into that very basic kind of model and framework of the right message to the right consumer at the right time. And that is exactly what context is. Because context is leveraging data, leveraging that motivation kind of vector to then talk to a consumer at that right moment, within the right environment, where they are most likely to lean in, they are most likely to respond back. Now we come to what we call the elephant in the room section, because these are, I would say, the three most frequently asked questions whenever we bring up this topic of addressability with stakeholders and our clients. I think the first one is addressable DCO? And we want to take this head on. We don't want to shirk away from this because there is a perception within the marketing community that when we talk addressability, what we are fundamentally talking about is recasting an existing set of creative using a machine into multiple different iterations. Is addressability just DCO? Absolutely not. But does DCO become an inclusive part of being addressable? Absolutely yes. There are fantastic executions that have leveraged DCO, and we'll talk about them a little later. But there are also the not so good executions of DCO, which result in lowest end kind of advertising. That is just pesky, that causes that dissonance, which we again spoke about earlier. The second big question that comes up is addressability just a tactic that I can apply on addressable channels, which are digital, which are programmatic? Well, the world is changing faster than we could imagine. I mean, we think of a time not so very long ago when we just planned based on analog, linear, and digital and programmatic. But that world is coming together very swiftly. What we believe to be linear and analog is no longer linear and analog. Television is an extremely good example of that. So when we look at a market like Australia, for instance, we are seeing an incredible rise of addressable television, where we're able to talk to people on that large screen with the entire audiovisual experience that television offers, but with a level of precision that was erstwhile reserved only for digital. And I think that is really powerful. And that presents an opportunity that we've never had before. The third, and again, a very powerful question that comes to us is, does addressable apply only for direct marketing? Does it only apply for performance? And I think this is just an unfortunate reality of how we have, I would say, misused data and the opportunity that offered us. Because yes, there are several use cases of brands using that data, using that precision only to drive that last mile. But we fundamentally believe that addressability is a strategy, is a tactic that you can apply across the funnel. And I will show you a couple of use cases where brands have used addressable in an incredibly powerful way across that entire funnel. So just delving on this very quickly, just a few examples here. I mean, we are happy to have a chat with you separately and take you through more use cases across more categories, but I'll just talk about two examples. So on one end, which is at the upper funnel, you have a brand like Mars or a brand like Pedigree, which is fundamentally a brand that is mass market, which is based on the premise that everything that you do from a comms perspective must reach the widest possible audience. But they also believe that not all reach is equal. They also believe that there are nuances to talking that entire universe, where you can look at that entire universe, but with the granularity of certain segments within that universe behaving differently, having certain nuances. So how do you bring that to life? How you do that is through addressability. And what brands like that have done, what Mars and Pedigree have done, is that they've used the entire spectrum of channels available, from television to outdoor to audio display and even to social, to kind of bring that to life, and driven up to 25% addressable lifts. But at the other end of the spectrum, you have brands like IKEA, which are using very smart optimization techniques to target people at those moments of intent where they're able to push them and nudge them further down the funnel. But again, this is driven by a very granular understanding of users, about understanding their entire journey path, looking at the product sets that they're likely to buy, what is their motivation and the likelihood of them purchasing, and then driving communication that nudges them along the funnel. So just to reiterate, addressable, is it just DCO? Absolutely not. Is it just programmatic? Absolutely not. Is it just used to drive lower funnel metrics? Absolutely not. Think of addressable as that end-to-end layer that helps you solve for the business across the funnel. So what then are the building blocks of addressable? And I can talk about this at length, and I would again urge you to read the white paper, because I think we break this down into more simple frameworks for you, so that you can actually start to pin down each component of what this entire strategy implies. But we believe fundamentally that there are three building blocks. So the first is intelligent creation. Intelligent creation involves a bit of looking back, which means what are the channels that have historically performed well? What is a combination of channel and audience that has typically given you a certain result? And further on, what is a combination of channel, audience, and asset type or format that has also driven certain results? So that gives you a very granular understanding of what is that sweet spot from an implementation perspective that is likely to drive a result. Then you have to have an engine that uses that data and starts to construct that into creative. Now, one of the shifts that we see brands making when they start to move into addressability is to start thinking of creative not as static creative, which follows certain templates, but almost as this very agile modular ecosystem. So the simplest use case is to look at, the typical example is that of a display ad where you have fixed and dynamic elements. But where we are trying to challenge brands is to start thinking of the palette as being much larger. Can that palette be an outdoor site where the communication changes given the time of day, breakfast, lunch, dinner? Can the communication change based on weather, rainy day, hot day, cold day? Can the communication change based on the volume of traffic that sits outside of that site at that point? So I think you start to think in these modular ecosystems, and that starts to help you build the construct of storytelling from that agility and from that dynamism. What you then need is that combination, which again is a harmonious combination of man and machine, because creating those iterative rotations does require automation, does require technology. And I think there are several fantastic technologies out there which help you do this at tremendous scale with tremendous precision, because it is the ability to ingest data at speeds that are not possible manually, but to also then analyze that data and then create environments, create assets that serve a specific purpose. But what is most important and what underlies all of this is that layer of intelligent optimization. And we believe that layer of intelligent optimization is creating a virtuous circle of data that goes into every single stakeholder within this ecosystem, that feeds into not just media, but also creative. We have spent a lot of time and we have built some great products over the last couple of years, which actually help us reimagine the way we even do creative analysis. So we've looked at creative analysis not just from the holistic lens of, okay, these creatives give us better engagement, But we started to look at a level which is slightly deeper. What are the elements within certain creatives that drive certain results? So does the inclusion of talent or the exclusion of talent drive a certain result? Does the inclusion of a CT or a certain background color drive certain better lift than others? And I think that granularity, when it's fed into this entire ecosystem, creates that virtuous cycle where you can start to see results coming through. So just to reiterate, think of intelligent creation, look back, then look at an engine where you're bringing the creativity of humans and the power and automation of technology together, and then create that virtuous circle of data feedbacks and those loops that kind of bring everything together. And lastly, I think again, is addressable for you? And again, an honest conversation, not really, not all the time. Because there are certain use cases where you are trying to force fit a solution where you might not need such a solution. And we again always have this very open and honest discussion with our brands and our partners that this journey of addressability needs to start with first what the problem is, and does addressability really help you solve that problem? You will hear after me a case study from Uber in Japan where we followed this process, and we really stressed the problem. We really stressed whether taking this route of personalization was the right route to take in terms of solving that problem. The second, and again, I think this is particularly important for a region like APAC, which has such diverse geographies, such diverse tech ecosystems across every market, we need to do a feasibility check. We have started to build some kind of protocols where we provide our brands very simple kind of use cases of going through feasibility, whether you have the right ecosystem, whether you have the right data assets, whether you have the right volume of data in your market. Also looking at things like campaign budget, campaign size, flight periods, so that you're allowing the algorithms enough time to optimize. And the final bit is to bake this into the end-to-end. Blake and me spoke yesterday, and I think you'll talk to him a little later, when we were just talking about how addressability tends to become that stardust of DCO that we throw at the end of the entire planning journey. And it can't just be that. It has to be a conversation that starts at the start of a journey, at trying to solve a problem, at the start of an upstream strategic thought process, at the start of an upstream planning process. And the last and most important bit is to make this entire process measurable. How do you get that data back? How do you create that feedback loop? How do you quantifiably start to demonstrate the value that addressability is bringing into the entire growth ecosystem, into the entire business? And I think that is very, very important. So that's it from me. Sorry for the technical glitches up front. I will now hand it over to two of the smartest people that I have the pleasure to work with. So Joyce, who's my colleague and lead strategy for us here at Mediacom, and Alex, who's been our partner in crime in this amazing journey that we've had with Addressable in Japan. So Joyce and Alex, over to you.
Thanks, Sid. Hey, Alex. Nice to chat with you on this. We have about 10 minutes. It's a great introduction from Sid. I would say that Alex is definitely the smarter partner of both of us. And we're going to talk you through a little bit about Japan and Uber Eats in Japan. So just to give a bit of context, Uber Eats in Japan, well, Japan is a really important market for Uber, particularly Uber Eats. It's a place in which we've seen, growth, and we've seen our role as, a leader brand having to grow the category to convince our audiences that, online food delivery is right for them. And for, most of the time as a brand, we believe in scale as one of the key things for us to achieve as a brand, because we believe there is value in every person in the population to receive from an online food delivery provider such as ourselves, because everyone will enjoy food and everyone should enjoy the convenience of online food delivery. But I think in Japan, we faced an interesting, challenge, so to speak, last year, where we saw certain opportunities or challenges in which we needed to find new ways to grow the category and to speak to different sorts of audiences, or audiences in a slightly different way. Alex, you want to build a bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, thanks to Sid for the introduction, and thanks to Mediacom for having me on the call. I'm Alex, and I lead media for Uber APAC out of Singapore. And Joyce, I'm definitely not a smarter partner on this half. I think you're the smarter partner. But just moving on to the question that you asked earlier on, and I think being aligned with what Sid had been saying throughout the entire presentation is that our consumer is at the core of it. That is the most consistent thing that we all have to be consistently aware about is what do they want, what matters to them, how can we actually reach out to them in the most relevant way without being intrusive, without being superficial about it. When we went into the Japan campaign itself, we definitely have a lot of research and insights. And Uber is a very customer-centric, consumer-centric company. We have a lot of research and white papers and all this kind of stuff to understand who our audiences are. Even if, let's say, they're Gen Pop, what within the Gen Pop itself do we need to actually understand? And also, with the other players in the market, how are they reaching their consumers, which by and large is also our consumers? Hence, from that kind of cross research and also learnings, and also a lot of valuable insights from MediaCom itself, we managed to identify the campaign that we wanted to actually run, which maybe I'll hand back to Joyce for you to actually run through what we actually did there.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Alex. So in the next slide, let us just look at the process, right, of how this journey has been for us when it came to implementing this addressable. And actually what in the first place was, one of the questions that we're trying to solve. So as Alex mentioned, there is a lot of data that we get from Uber, which is amazing as, an agency to a client. And we were noticing that, there were certain specific audience groups, particularly those who were above the age of 40, who showed signs of pretty strong barriers to using online food delivery because they felt that convenience could be obtained through just walking down to like the nearest restaurant or the nearest convenience store, and we wanted to think about a way in which we could speak to these audiences to present Uber Eats as the better meal solutions for all their needs. So the starting point was really audience, as Alex had mentioned, and it was also really clear in the brief that Uber Eats Japan had shared with us and all the agency partners. Can we understand what and who these audiences are in terms of their motivations and their barriers? And can we then identify what are some of the needs, or what we call peak needs, in which we as a brand had a really strong role to play? And that was actually the brief to us. So we worked with, several data partners. We worked with all the data that came from Uber Eats. We also worked with the likes of Google, Facebook, Twitter, etc., to understand, a little bit more about these audiences and where some of these unique needs were. And what we came up with was, an insight and an observation in which the 40 plus audiences are not one single group of people. There are different cohorts with different needs. They could be parents of kids of, various different ages. They could also be working professionals. Many of them are, and all of them created, all of them needed rather very specific needs when it came to meal time and meal solutions. And what we did then was present to Uber that, hey, we identified some of these really peak moments in which we think as a brand we had a really good role to play, but we can't have a one-size-fits-all communication to do the job. We needed to have, very relevant messaging to different moments, such as during different meal times, as well as, different occasions of eating. And that was really the feedback to Uber. And that actually started then the way in which we scoped out this addressable approach for Uber Eats for this particular campaign. So in that, we identified which were the moments or the needs in which we felt were the most relevant for the brand. And there were a few things. And one of the things that we'll show you is how to beat the summer heat in Japan. And another few areas were including, how is it that we gave really right solutions to audiences who were working professionals during lunchtime, so they didn't have to go and fight with other people to line up in the queues before they had to get back to work. So a lot of these were presented, and together with, the creative agencies, the production agencies, and also thinking about where media should be placed. And that's really the intent part of what Sid had spoken about. We looked at creating, this basically ecosystem almost of messages that we wanted to deliver to our audiences. So let's take a look a little bit at this heat wave example that you see in front. Maybe that illustrates the point a little bit better. So imagine that you are in one of the hottest summers in Japan, and if for all of us who enjoyed Tokyo Summer Olympics, you remember that we had like one of the highest temperatures ever clocked in August time. And so it was an amazing opportunity for us because when it's hot, have some cooling food. And we identified, just great opportunities for us to present different food items that were very well associated with summer into this strategy. Every time the temperatures of Japan or a particular city rose to 32 degrees or above, we triggered an ad that actually said that, hey, it's getting really hot. Why don't you beat your summer heat with some of these food items delivered to you very conveniently and easily through Uber Eats? But the magic that we wanted to put in with the use of data was that actually, if you think about Japan and all the different states, ramen, for example, which is also a dish that people like to eat during summer, actually looks really different in different regions. So what we also ingested as a data point was to present different types of ramen that were very well known to specific regions in Japan. So wherever the audience came from, say Tokyo versus Kyushu, they would see slightly different images of the ramen because that was going to be more relevant to them and where they were staying. So the message was very clear. Beat the summer heat whenever temperatures rose to above 32 degrees and you were starting to feel like, I need a little bit of a cooling break. But see the ad and see the food creative, which is really, really unique and special to your region and where you live, and take an action with Uber Eats. And I'm just going to very quickly talk about some of the key results that we saw. And, Alex, I will pass on to you to just talk about also what this, how this actually created impact for Uber Eats. In the next slide, please. So from a media standpoint, and this is just a very quick GIF, from a media standpoint, we see that, there are about 5 million plus impressions that we actually managed to land with our 40 plus audiences. So you can clearly see that even though we were doing an addressable strategy, there was still a lot of scale that we could, achieve, but with a lot of precision. We saw that on average, there were 19% more click-throughs to the ads because it was just simply more relevant to the audiences at a time when it mattered, which was when it was hot. And, we're in need of a very cooling solution. There was 49% increase in the view-through rates on Instagram. And, we created during that period, just for Heatwave alone, 250 plus creatives, which was only possible because we were using some of our production partners, including Hogarth, to use technology to really rapidly churn out these very, very targeted specific messages. Alex, just a little bit from you about the impact on Uber Eats as a business.
Yeah, thank you, Joyce. So when we were running this particular campaign itself, it ran from last year, from I think August till sometime in December itself. So it ran for around 3 months. Prior to that, maybe just giving you a bit of a context around Uber Eats Japan is that we are in the market where culturally it's a little bit difficult to be shifting some of the cultural nuances that Joyce had actually been talking about. So for example, it's very convenient for you to actually head out there to get specific food items or things like that you wanted to actually do simply because of Japan's layout where convenience stores are just literally convenient for them. On top of that, we actually have a very huge player, another player within the market itself that has been in the market for way longer than we actually do. So how do we actually cut in and cut through to the different audiences that we have? Through the past couple of years, we have been running campaigns, we've been running a lot of things. A lot of good work has actually been done. So I wouldn't necessarily credit 100% of the results that we actually see to the addressable strategy that we have. But I think if we were to actually look at during the period where we ran this campaign, what we saw on the market level, and this is not platform level, I'm talking about on the market level where there's an increase in consideration lift and very, very static consideration lift, that we realized that addressability is definitely resonating well with the audiences that we actually have. And from there, those are learnings that we started to actually apply moving forward as well. So while I'm not comfortable to actually share exactly what are the business metrics that we have actually improved on the revenue and all this kind of stuff, I hope you guys understand. We are able to actually let you know that by consideration itself, where the baseline was very hard to actually grow in the first place, we managed to actually increase by at least 2 to 3 points within the market itself.
Amazing. Thank you, Alex. And yeah, that's it from us from a case study.
Cool. Thanks, guys. That was super. Now we've gone through, a bit of inspiration from Sid and a few kind of personal stories in there, which was quite nice from Sid. We're going to I want to ask a few questions. There's been a couple of questions that have come in from people on the chat, but I also want to ask questions from the experts as well. One of the things that really came across to me, well, there's a few things that came across to me in there that kind of dispelled a few myths around addressability. It's not just programmatic targeting and audience, but it really is a strategic conversation that's able to deliver specific content to those desired audiences through using the right data. So contextual data that Sid spoke about, intent and motivational data. So the first question I'm going to ask is actually to Sid to Alex and around that case. It seems quite easy for Uber. You're probably one of the most data-rich companies in the world. Geo data, what people are eating, where people are going. You kind of have the luxury of targeting people at free will. So how does that addressable strategy really help your business in the way that you guys work?
Thank you, Josh. That's a great question. Uber, by and large, and if by any chance anyone on the call don't know what services Uber provide, just a very quick introduction. It provides a ride-hailing service and also a food delivery service by connecting the merchants with the consumers that we have. And regardless of these two different line of businesses that we have, by and large, Uber as a brand has Gen-Pop as our audience. But the thing is that we have to understand when we run campaigns itself, there are many different nuances when, even though it's a Gen-Pop campaign. So it's not just about running an 18+ campaign through the whole of Japan, through the whole of Taiwan, through the whole of Australia, where we just target everyone with a single piece of message. There are many nuances, such as seasonality, which Joyce mentioned earlier on with heatwave. There are different products, so eats and rides. Within eats and rides itself, maybe there are different products that we want to actually put out to our consumers. And then for the different user profiles, so there's a 40+ campaign that we also run in concurrent with the heatwave campaign. Those are different nuances that we have. And it is with addressability that allows us to actually target all these different campaigns and different users at scale without having to create so many different creatives and assets at one go. The strategy not only helps us with our brand narrative with the existing users, but it also helps us to reach out to lost and new audiences that we might have over the years as well. So I would say that it definitely helped with the strategies that we have here in APAC.
Cool. So I'll follow up on that point and get your advice, because there's probably a lot of brands and media people on here today that have been sold in the kind of the dream of addressability, think that it's really easy. But my question to you is, does that mean every campaign needs to be addressable? Or are there certain variables that you think broadly you can kind of take into account when coming up with an addressable strategy?
Thank you, Josh. This is a point that Sid had mentioned earlier on, is it for everyone? And I'm going to just echo him that no, this addressability is not for every single campaign that we want to run. There are a lot of things that needs to be considered, and being aligned with the whole consumer-centric point of view is we need to first understand our consumer, what do they want, identify the objective, and then approach it from there. When I say everything is aligned, then maybe, yes, addressability would be a powerful strategy for us. And I want to actually give credit to the Addressable campaign that we run. It's very, very powerful. However, alignment is a lot bigger than just looking at the objective, what are the audiences, what are the budget, what are the campaigns that we have. It is also very important for the partners that we're actually working with. So in this case, we have our creative agency, our media agency, the advertising agency, the data points that we have. How do we bring all of that together? And having those fundamentals in place is what I would then call an alignment on running a successful addressable campaign.
Okay, now I'm going to go to Blake. I think we've spoken a lot about the theory of addressability, around some of the things that we can use, media, signals, data. None of it makes sense without the right creative. You can segment an audience, but if you don't have addressable creative that goes to them, it's definitely going to fall down. So how are you using, I suppose, that data and some of those media choices working in conjunction with message to make a really powerful addressable campaign?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's still crazy that we still see the same message being absolutely delivered to everyone when we're using such rich data to target people. the way that we're doing it at Hogarth, working really closely with agencies like yourselves at MediaCom, is really bringing that piece up the funnel in terms of its planning. So when you guys are doing your strategy from a media strategy point of view, the content creation strategy is also at that beginning stage as well. I'm sure a lot of people on this call have witnessed, trying to activate a personalization campaign, but it's really sometimes trying to fit a square into a circle because it's an afterthought. You're trying to adapt a piece of content that was never meant to be addressable. And the way that we do it is we're adding an overlay or adding an end card. Like it loses that level of craft. And so the way that what we're trying to do is really flip that way of thinking completely on its head, where we're talking about how do we remove addressability as being, down and dirty at the bottom of the funnel, bringing it up so we can really elevate that craft. Because I think as well, that's going to help a lot of the brands have that sense of security where they're not, they're not thinking that it's going to look like a DCO banner where it's very price point driven, it's very action orientated. You can use the same mechanics from a storytelling perspective. And so I think, and also that's great for creatives because creatives want to win awards. So we can also win awards and everyone's happy. So we can, it's really about bringing it further up the funnel.
Yeah, I'm gonna follow up with a question from someone in the comments, and I am going to ask you, Blake, because you seem very passionate about this. There's a question from Justin in the comments, and I'll paraphrase it a little bit. And I suppose there's some of the misconceptions that you've spoken about in there that addressability is just DCO, that it is lower funnel, that it's down and dirty. What do you think is holding back the market at the moment from the full potential of addressability? What are some of the barriers that you're seeing? And I'm sure there's many, but maybe just a couple of key barriers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if I had an hour, I'd tell you all of the barriers that I've witnessed. But I think that one of the core components of it is really, I almost call it that we need to do this great reset. We've got the great resignation about to happen. It's almost we need to do this great reset in terms of how we think about addressability. Because unfortunately, because DCO has had such a bad reputation in market, because we didn't have the right people running DCO back in 2014. It was overly complex. People thought it was a technology. It wasn't a craft skill set. It was just very, very messy. And so, I think we almost need to all together collectively re-educate the market on what really addressability is, but also being able to really bring media and creative content production together, right? Because the only way addressability is going to really truly come to life and be effective is if that creative itself is also got those rich elements that you guys are using from a targeting perspective. It's also as well thinking that technology alone can solve or deliver addressability. It can't, and that's from a Hogarth standpoint. What we're really doing to solve that is, bringing art directors, interactive designers, copywriters all the way upstream on the addressable journey. It's not just thinking about it as being purely a conversion layer. So I think as well, it's that idea that there is that level of craft still involved in addressability. It's not, it's not just someone using a spreadsheet and putting a different price point. There's actually craft involved.
Awesome. I think we're running out of time. I was going to ask some more questions. I'm going to answer one of the questions that I was going to ask. And I think one of the really telling things about how we do overcome the addressability barrier is kind of right in front of us at the moment. You kind of need the right people in the room. You need a client that's switched on and leaned into it. You need creative strategy, you need digital and understanding of how the ecosystem works, and you need comm strategy and a really good understanding of the audience as well. And I think for anyone out there, just get on a call with these 4 or 5 people wherever they sit across the world, and that combination of people will start to overcome some of the barriers to get addressability up and running and for you to really understand it. So I'm going to wrap up a little bit with here. I really think addressable media and message solves a whole heap of problems, and it's going to solve a whole heap of problems in the future. One of the big things that it's going to solve is that match between consumers' expectation for personalization, as Sid said, around curation, and stop this incessant need for us to just retarget, for us to have a bigger conversation with consumers, for brands to have a place that is relevant in their lives and really makes sense for what they're doing. Final thing for me, it should be a strategy conversation. This isn't the lower funnel, down and dirty. We've said it a couple of times. It must be about more relevant media and message choices. So that's it for us today. I want to thank Sid, Alex, Joyce, and Blake for joining us. It's been really interesting. It's been really informative for me. So thank you. Thanks everyone for joining. We're going to be back next month and we're going to talk about social commerce. We're going to talk about social commerce that's moving from the high street. The way people are shopping is changing. They're moving from physical stores and they're going into the shopping feed. We're going to explore that in a bit more depth in about a month's time. So please join us, and thank you everyone once again.